My name is Chantel Williams, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I would be publicly humiliated by my own daughter-in-law. Amanda was supposed to be the perfect addition to our small family when she married my only son, James. But everything changed at that dinner party last spring when she threw my plate to the floor and screamed those words. I can still hear echoing in my nightmares. "You hateful old woman, get out of my life." What happened next would transform our family forever. If you're watching this and have ever felt disrespected by family, let me know where you're from and hit subscribe, because what happened next might help you too. Before Amanda entered our lives, it was just James and me for nearly a decade. My husband Thomas passed away from a sudden heart attack when he was only 59, leaving me a widow at 58. The loss devastated us both, but in some ways it brought James and me even closer. He was 28, then already building his career at a software company in Burlington, but he would drive the 40 minutes to our home in rural Vermont every Sunday without fail for dinner. Our relationship had always been special. As an only child, James received all my attention and love. When he was little, we would spend hours reading together in the window seat of our farmhouse, his small head tucked against my shoulder as we explored worlds beyond our snowy Vermont hills. Thomas used to joke that we had our own secret language, the way we could communicate with just a glance across the dinner table. After Thomas died, those Sunday dinners became our lifeline. James would arrive with groceries, insisting on cooking to give me a break, though we both knew his culinary skills were limited to pasta and grilled cheese sandwiches. We would laugh about his attempts, then end up ordering takeout or making something simple together. Those evenings were filled with memories, laughter, and sometimes tears as we navigated our grief together. James had dated casually over the years, but no one serious until Amanda. They met at his company 5 years ago when she transferred from the New York office to take over as marketing director. James called me the very night they met, his voice animated in a way I hadn't heard since before his father died. "Mom, I met someone today. She's brilliant and beautiful and completely intimidating," he said, chuckling nervously. "She tore apart my entire project proposal in a meeting, then asked me to coffee to explain all the ways I could improve it." 3 weeks later, he brought Amanda to our Sunday dinner. I still remember how she looked that first day, striding into my home with the confidence of someone used to commanding boardrooms. Amanda was tall and striking, with her dark hair cut in a sleek bob, wearing a cashmere sweater and designer jeans that made my own outfit seem dowdy by comparison. She brought an expensive bottle of wine and complimented my home with the polite interest of someone visiting a quaint museum. Our first meetings were pleasant but slightly formal. Amanda was clearly making an effort, asking questions about family photos and listening to stories about James as a child with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I tried my best to make her feel welcome, adapting our Sunday menu to accommodate her gluten-free diet and asking about her work to draw her into conversations. When James told me they were getting serious, I made even more effort. I invited Amanda for lunch, just the two of us, and shared family recipes. I gave her a delicate silver bracelet that had belonged to my mother, telling her I wanted her to have something meaningful from our family. Amanda accepted it with surprise, slipping it onto her wrist and admiring how it caught the light. For a moment, I thought I saw genuine emotion in her expression. "James talks about you constantly," she told me over lunch. "He says you're the strongest woman he knows." Big shoes to fill. There was something in her tone I couldn't quite place, but I chose to take the words at face value. 3 years ago, they had a beautiful fall wedding at a vineyard overlooking Lake Champlain. I threw myself into helping with the planning, though I quickly learned that Amanda had very specific ideas about everything. When I suggested incorporating the hand-fasting ritual that had been part of our family weddings for generations, Amanda dismissed it as too rustic for the elegant affair she envisioned. "We're really going for a more modern aesthetic, Chantel," she explained, using my first name as she always did, despite my gentle suggestions that she could call me Mom if she wanted. "But thank you for the suggestion." I noticed other small warning signs during the wedding planning. How she would roll her eyes slightly when James mentioned our family traditions. How she redirected conversations when they didn't interest her. How she seemed to measure everything, including people, by their appearance and status. But I pushed these concerns aside. James was happier than I'd seen him in years, and wasn't that what mattered most? The wedding itself was picture perfect, though it felt more like an elegant business function than the warm family celebration I had imagined for my only son. I wore a blue dress that Amanda had helped select, smiled for countless photos, and gave a toast that I'd practiced for weeks to make sure I struck the right tone. James hugged me with tears in his eyes after my speech, whispering, "Thanks for being so great with Amanda. It means the world to me." After the honeymoon, they bought a house just 20 minutes from mine, which seemed like a blessing. James said they wanted to stay close, and I envisioned regular family gatherings and the possibility of grandchildren nearby someday. Amanda seemed pleased with the property, an architectural showpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the mountains. It was nothing like my cozy farmhouse with its worn wooden floors and quilts draped over sofas, but it suited them. I was careful to respect their space, never dropping by, unannounced and always calling before visiting. I wanted to be supportive, without being intrusive, walking the delicate line that all mothers of married children must navigate. When Amanda mentioned they were considering starting a family soon, I offered to help in any way they needed, but made it clear I wouldn't overstep. "I appreciate that, Chantel," Amanda said with a tight smile. "Some mothers-in-law can be so overbearing." I tried not to take it personally, focusing instead on building a relationship with this woman who now held such an important place in our small family. If only I had recognized then how quickly things would change. The shift in Amanda's behavior happened so gradually that at first I hardly noticed it. Little comments about my home when she and James would visit for dinner began to multiply. What started as, "Have you ever thought about updating these curtains?" evolved into, "This place is so cluttered, I don't know how you find anything delivered," with a laugh that suggested she was just teasing. When I wore a blouse I'd had for years to their housewarming party, Amanda pulled me aside. "I could take you shopping sometime, Chantel. There are some great styles now that would be much more flattering for your figure." Her smile seemed kind, but her eyes evaluated me like I was a problem to solve. During one Sunday dinner at my house about 6 months after the wedding, Amanda rearranged my table setting before we ate. "The fork goes on this side, Chantel," she said, switching everything around. "And water glasses should be positioned here." James looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Then came the redecoration of their home. I visited one afternoon to drop off some gardening books James had asked to borrow, and noticed all the family photos had been moved. The large portrait of James with his father fishing, which had previously held a place of honor in their living room, was now tucked away in the guest bedroom. In its place hung an abstract painting in shades of gray and white that matched their minimalist decor. "We're going for a more cohesive aesthetic," Amanda explained when she saw me notice the change. "Those old photos didn't really fit the space." She said it casually, as if she hadn't just relegated generations of family memories to corners where visitors would never see them. James began working longer hours, coming home stressed and distracted. When I expressed concern during our increasingly rare phone conversations, he brushed it off. "Just busy with a big project, Mom." Amanda's under pressure too with her promotion track. He sounded tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then sporadic. Amanda frequently had work emergencies that required her attention even on weekends. When she did attend, she spent most of the time on her phone occasionally, showing James something that made them both laugh, excluding me from whatever joke they shared. One afternoon I stopped by to drop off some mail that had been delivered to my house by mistake. Their car was in the driveway, but no one answered when I rang the bell. As I was about to leave the envelope in their mailbox, I heard Amanda's voice through the open patio window. "No, we can't do Friday. We have dinner with Chantel," she was saying, her tone dramatically weary. I know. The weekly obligation to humor the mother-in-law. She'll probably bring another one of her terrible casseroles and talk about James's childhood for hours. Kill me now." I froze, the envelope clutched in my hand, as laughter filtered through the window. She was mocking me to her friends. I placed the mail silently in the box and drove home with tears blurring my vision, questioning every interaction we'd ever had. When I finally worked up the courage to address the issue a week later, suggesting that perhaps we should talk about improving our relationship, Amanda looked at me with genuine confusion. What are you talking about? We have a great relationship. Don't be so sensitive, Chantel. She patted my hand as if I were a child. Maybe it's just that time of life. My mother got very emotional during menopause, too. I was 65 years old. Menopause was well behind me. James seemed increasingly caught in the middle, his expression pained whenever tension arose between his wife and mother. Can't you just try a little harder with her, Mom? He asked, during a rare moment alone. Amanda's under a lot of pressure at work. She doesn't always express herself well when she's stressed. I bit back the response that rose to my lips that I had been trying, endlessly trying, while Amanda seemed to go out of her way to find fault with me. Instead, I nodded and promised to make more effort swallowing my hurt for my son's sake. The real joy of that difficult year came with the news that they were expecting a baby. Despite everything, I was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. When Tyler was born a year ago, I fell instantly in love with his tiny, perfect face and the way his little hand curled around my finger when I first held him. He looks just like you did as a baby, I told James, softly memories washing over me. He has your father's eyes. Amanda watched this exchange from her hospital bed, her expression unreadable. When I offered to stay with them for a few days after they brought Tyler home to help, while they adjusted to parenthood, her refusal was immediate and firm. We want to bond as a nuclear family, she said. Too many people around can interfere with breastfeeding and establishing routines. I respected their decision, sending over home-cooked meals instead and waiting for an invitation to visit. When it finally came 2 weeks later, I arrived to find Amanda's mother, Sylvia, already installed in their guest room. She had flown in from California and would be staying for a month. Amanda needs her mother right now, James explained apologetically when he saw my expression. You understand, don't you? I did understand all too clearly. I was not the mother Amanda wanted or needed. I was an obligation, an outsider looking in at my own family. As Tyler grew, my access to him was carefully controlled. I was allowed scheduled visits, usually when Amanda had something else to do. If I brought gifts, they were often not quite right and disappeared after my visits. If I offered childcare advice, I was firmly told that parenting methods had changed since my day. The final blow came when I discovered through a casual comment from my neighbor Greta that Amanda had been speaking about me to others in our community. I ran into your daughter-in-law at the farmer's market, Greta said when we met at the mailboxes. She mentioned you've been having some memory issues lately. Is everything okay? Do you need any help around the house? I stood there stunned. There were no memory issues, no health problems Amanda could possibly be concerned about. She was systematically undermining me, painting a picture of a declining elderly woman who couldn't be trusted. And worse people were believing her. I'm perfectly fine, I managed to say. There must be some misunderstanding. But the damage was done. I began noticing concerned glances from acquaintances' offers of help. I didn't need questions about whether I should still be driving. Amanda was using her position as a young mother and professional to cast doubt on my competence, and I felt powerless to counter the narrative she was creating. The dinner party that changed everything happened on a Saturday in April. Amanda had received a significant promotion at work, and they were hosting a celebration dinner for her colleagues and friends. I wasn't initially invited. I learned about it when James called to tell me he'd be unavailable for our planned lunch that weekend. It's a work thing for Amanda, he explained vaguely. Just some people from her office. It was only when I heard background noise that I realized he was calling from a store. Are you shopping? I asked. Yeah, picking up some wine for Saturday. Amanda wants everything perfect for her boss and team. The hurt must have been evident in my silence because James quickly added, You should come too, Mom. I'm sure Amanda just assumed you wouldn't be interested in a work event. I hesitated, torn between pride and the desire to be included in my son's life. Are you sure I wouldn't be intruding? Of course not. It's at 7. Wear something nice, okay? Amanda's boss is pretty impressive. That last comment stung, suggesting I might embarrass them if I didn't make a special effort with my appearance. Still, I was determined to make the best of the invitation. I spent the next day shopping for a new outfit, something that even Amanda couldn't find fault with. I settled on a deep blue dress with a matching jacket, elegant but not trying too hard to look young. I also prepared a gift for Amanda to congratulate her on the promotion. A beautiful fountain pen in a case. It had been a tradition in our family, something my father had done for me when I got my first teaching position years ago. I even made my special apple pie, the one James had loved since childhood, as my contribution to the dinner. When I arrived at their home that evening, carefully made up and holding my pie and gift, Amanda's smile froze slightly at the sight of me. "Chantel, James mentioned he'd invited you." She accepted the gift with a distracted thank you and directed me to put the pie in the kitchen. The house was transformed with flower arrangements and candles, looking like something from a design magazine. About 20 people were already there, mingling with drinks in the open-concept living area. No one I recognized besides James, who gave me a quick hug before being pulled away by someone asking about wine options. "Mom, find yourself a drink. I'll introduce you around in a minute," he called over his shoulder. I stood awkwardly in the entrance to the living room, feeling suddenly invisible despite my careful preparations. Amanda was across the room, animatedly talking with a distinguished-looking man who must have been her boss. She didn't bother to introduce me to anyone or acknowledge my presence further. When dinner was announced, I discovered I had been seated at the far end of their long dining table next to an empty chair and a young man who was engrossed in his phone. James and Amanda were at the opposite end, where she held court with her boss and senior colleagues. Throughout the elaborate meal, I tried several times to join conversations. When I mentioned I had been an educator for 30 years, Amanda's colleague Jenny showed genuine interest. "What grades did you teach, Chantel?" she asked. Before I could answer, Amanda called from her end of the table, "Jenny, you have to tell everyone about that client presentation you did last week. It was genius." This pattern repeated itself throughout the evening. Anytime I began to connect with someone, Amanda would redirect the conversation. I overheard someone asking about me, and Amanda's response made my heart sink. "That's James's mother. She lives alone out in the country. We try to include her when we can, you know how it is with elderly parents." She made me sound ancient and pitiful. I was 68 active and lived independently in the same home where I had raised my son. The way she spoke, you would think I was infirm and isolated, an obligation rather than a beloved family member. By dessert time, I felt completely deflated but was determined to maintain my dignity. When James mentioned they should bring out coffee, I saw my opportunity to contribute. "I brought my apple pie," I said, rising from my seat. "Let me go get it ready." In the kitchen, I carefully sliced the pie and arranged it on the dessert plates I found in their cabinet. James came in to help, giving me a grateful smile. "Your famous apple pie," he said. "I've been telling everyone about it." That small moment of connection gave me courage. I carried the pie to the table with a renewed sense of purpose, setting it down near Amanda. "This is an old family recipe," I explained to those nearby. "James's favorite since he was little." Amanda's expression tightened. "We actually have a catered dessert coming, Chantel. The chocolate torte I mentioned earlier." "There's room for both," James said quickly. "Mom's pie is legendary." I began serving slices to those who expressed interest, including Amanda's boss, who said he couldn't resist homemade pie. As I handed him a plate, I added, "The secret is a splash of bourbon in the filling. It's a tradition in our family to add a little something special to recipes and pass them down through generations." Amanda's voice cut through the pleasant murmurs around the table. "We don't really do the whole tradition thing anymore. It's so limiting, don't you think? Always looking backward instead of forward." The table grew quiet. I set down the pie server, feeling the familiar sting of her dismissal. But something had shifted in me after hours of being marginalized in my own family. "Some traditions are worth preserving, Amanda," I said quietly. "They connect us to our history and to each other. They're what make a family a family." The silence deepened. Amanda's face flushed dark red, and her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Is that what you think we're lacking, family tradition?" Her voice was razor sharp. "Because from where I'm sitting, all your precious traditions haven't created anything but expectations and judgment." Amanda, James warned, but she was beyond hearing. In one swift motion, she stood and grabbed the plate of pie from in front of her, hurling it to the floor where it shattered with a crash that made everyone jump. Pieces of ceramic and apple filling splattered across the expensive hardwood. "You hateful old woman, get out of my life," she shouted, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "All you do is criticize and undermine me in my own home. I'm done pretending for James's sake." I stood frozen, feeling the shocked stares of 20 strangers witnessing my humiliation. The room spun slightly, and I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. James sat paralyzed, his face a mask of conflicted horror. He looked from his wife to me and back again, but said nothing. Not one word in my defense. That silence hurt more than Amanda's outburst. My son, who I had raised alone after his father died, couldn't find the courage to stand up for me. "I think I should go," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. I walked out with as much dignity as I could muster, refusing to let the tears come until I was safely in my car. As I drove home through blurred vision, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, but the illusion that I still had a place in my son's life. The days following Amanda's outburst were some of the darkest I've experienced since losing Thomas. I moved through my house like a ghost, unable to sleep more than an hour or two at a time. When I did sleep, I would jolt awake with Amanda's words ringing in my ears. "You hateful old woman, get out of my life." Had I been hateful? The question tormented me as I replayed every interaction with my daughter-in-law, searching for evidence of cruelty on my part. I had tried so hard to be welcoming, to respect their boundaries, to be the mother-in-law I would have wanted. Where had I gone so wrong? The humiliation of that public rejection burned like acid in my chest. I imagined the dinner guests discussing the scene afterward, pitying poor James with his unstable elderly mother and saintly wife, who finally snapped under the pressure of dealing with me. James texted the next day, "Mom, I'm sorry about last night." Amanda was stressed about impressing her boss. She didn't mean it. No call, just a text. And excuses, not a real apology from either of them. I couldn't bring myself to respond. He tried again the following day. "Can we talk? Amanda feels terrible." I doubted that very much. If Amanda felt anything, it was probably annoyance that her perfect dinner party had been disrupted. The fact that James was making excuses, instead of acknowledging how deeply I had been hurt, only compounded the pain. Physical symptoms began to manifest as the emotional toll mounted. My chest felt tight, making it difficult to breathe. I lost my appetite, completely existing on tea and toast for days. At night, I would find myself sitting in the dark, staring at nothing, unable to focus even on the books that had always been my comfort. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to echo with emptiness. I wandered from room to room, looking at the family photos that Amanda had banished from her own home. Here was James on his first bicycle. There he was graduating from college, his arm around me as we both beamed with pride. I had built my world around my son after Thomas died, and now that world had crumbled. The phone began ringing with calls from neighbors and acquaintances who had heard about the incident. News travels fast in small communities, and Amanda's outburst had become the latest gossip. I let the calls go to voicemail, unable to bear the thought of discussing my humiliation with others. One caller wouldn't be deterred. Dorothy Campbell had been my friend since we taught together at the elementary school 20 years ago. After leaving 3 messages, she simply showed up at my door with a casserole and a bottle of wine. "You can send me away if you want," she said when I opened the door, still in my bathrobe at 2 in the afternoon. "But I thought you might need a friend." I broke down crying before she even stepped inside. Dorothy guided me to the couch, poured us each a glass of wine despite the early hour, and simply listened as the whole story poured out of me. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," she said firmly when I'd finished. "Amanda behaved atrociously, and James should have defended you." "But maybe she's right," I whispered. "Maybe I am just a hateful old woman who can't let go." Dorothy's response was immediate and forceful. "Chantel Williams, I have known you for 2 decades, and there isn't a hateful bone in your body. That woman has been undermining you and isolating you from your son, and you've tolerated it with more grace than most would manage." She took my hands in hers, her expression serious. "The question isn't what you did wrong. It's why you've allowed yourself to be treated this way for so long." That night after Dorothy left, her words kept repeating in my mind. Why had I accepted such treatment? The answer was simple and painful. Fear of losing James. I had been so afraid of being cut out of my son's life that I had accepted increasingly disrespectful behavior, making myself smaller and less demanding, in hopes of being permitted to remain at the edges of their lives. My phone chimed with a text message the next morning. It was from James. Tyler's been asking for Grandma. Maybe you could come by for a short visit this weekend. No mention of Amanda. No acknowledgement of the hurt I was feeling. Just using my grandson as bait to smooth things over without addressing the real issues. For the first time, anger began to replace the hurt and confusion. I had raised my son to be a better man than this. I deserved more than to be treated as an inconvenience only welcome when it suited them or when they needed something from me. The breaking point came a week later. A card arrived in the mail, an invitation to Tyler's first birthday party. The date was wrong. The party had been the previous weekend, as I knew from James's social media posts, showing Tyler smashing cake into his face while Amanda beamed beside him. I hadn't been invited. I called James immediately, a rare surge of courage driving me to confront the situation. The invitation to Tyler's birthday just arrived, I said when he answered. But according to your Facebook, the party was last weekend. A long pause followed. Mom, I'm sorry. Amanda sent those out weeks ago. She must have forgotten to mail yours. She forgot to mail only my invitation, and you forgot to mention it during any of our conversations. Another pause. Things have been hectic. It wasn't a big deal, just a small family gathering. I am family, James. My voice broke on the last word. Of course you are. Look, we'll do something special, just the four of us. Amanda feels bad about what happened at the dinner. She's been under a lot of pressure. The same excuses, the same deflection. I hung up without responding, then sat at my kitchen table surrounded by old photos I'd been looking through. One in particular caught my eye, a picture of my mother on her 70th birthday. She stood straight-backed and proud, her expression both gentle and formidable. My mother had raised 3 children alone after my father died, had faced discrimination as one of the few female business owners in our town in the 1960s, and had never allowed anyone to diminish her worth. What would she think of me now, accepting scraps of affection and making excuses for people who treated me with disrespect? In that moment, looking into my mother's eyes across time, I made a decision. Something had to change, and since I couldn't control Amanda or James's behavior, the change would have to begin with me. The first step in my transformation was seeking outside perspective. I made an appointment with Dr. Levine, a family counselor whose name Dorothy had given me years ago when I was struggling with grief after Thomas died. I hadn't been ready for counseling then, but I was now. What brings you here today? Dr. Levine asked when I settled into the comfortable chair in her office. My daughter-in-law threw a plate at me and told me to get out of her life, I replied, surprising myself with the directness of my answer, and my son just sat there and said nothing. Over the next hour, I poured out the whole story from the early days of James and Amanda's relationship to the disastrous dinner party. Dr. Levine listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me talk. What you're describing contains elements of emotional manipulation, she said when I finished. The gradual isolation from your son, the undermining comments, the control of your access to your grandson, the public humiliation. These are concerning patterns. Her validation of my experience brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had questioned my own perceptions, wondering if I was being oversensitive or if my expectations were unreasonable. Family dynamics are complex, Dr. Levine continued, and the relationship between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law can be particularly challenging. But that doesn't excuse abusive behavior. That word abusive hit me like a physical blow. I had never thought of what I was experiencing in those terms. Unpleasant, yes. Hurtful, certainly, but abuse seemed too strong a word. I'm not saying Amanda is intentionally abusive, Dr. Levine clarified, seeing my reaction. But the impact of her behavior has been harmful to you regardless of her intentions. And James's failure to establish healthy boundaries that protect both his wife and his mother has enabled the situation to deteriorate. I left that first session with a stack of reading materials about toxic family dynamics and a homework assignment to reconnect with friends and activities I had neglected while focusing on James's family. The reading was eye-opening. I recognized so many patterns described in the articles and books, including my own enabling behaviors. I had been so focused on being the perfect mother-in-law that I had allowed my boundaries to be repeatedly violated. By trying to be understanding and accommodating at all costs, I had inadvertently communicated that disrespect was acceptable. Meanwhile, I took Dr. Levine's advice about reconnection seriously. I called old friends I hadn't seen in months, accepted an invitation to join a book club that met weekly at the local library, and volunteered to help with the community garden project I'd always been interested in but too busy. 4. Rediscovering parts of myself that existed independent of my identity as James's mother was both challenging and exhilarating. I had defined myself primarily as a mother for so long that I had forgotten the woman I was beyond that role. The most difficult step came 3 weeks after the dinner party incident. I made an appointment with Harold Giddings, the attorney who had handled Thomas's estate and helped me update my will after his death. It was time to review my financial and legal arrangements with clear eyes. "It's been a while," Chantel Harold said as I sat in his office. "What brings you in today?" "I need to review my will and other arrangements," I said. "Some circumstances have changed." Over the next hour, Harold and I went through all my documents. I had named James as my sole beneficiary and executor with provisions for Tyler. I had also given James power of attorney for healthcare and financial decisions if I became incapacitated. "Are you considering changes to these designations?" Harold asked. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I need to understand all my options." Harold explained various possibilities, including creating a trust with specific conditions, designating a different healthcare proxy, and adjusting the inheritance structure. He also asked questions about my current financial situation, which led to an unexpected revelation. "You've been providing substantial financial support to James and his wife," Harold clarified, looking over the bank statements I had brought. I hadn't thought of it that way, but the evidence was there in black and white. The large check for the down payment on their house, which I had offered as a gift. The monthly transfers to their account, which had started as temporary help when Amanda was between jobs and somehow never stopped. The credit card I had added James to for emergencies that now showed regular charges for restaurants, clothing stores, and golf club fees. "They've never explicitly asked for ongoing support," I explained, feeling embarrassed by my own naivety. "The down payment was a gift and the rest just evolved." Chantel Harold said gently, "Based on these figures, you've given them over $200,000 in the past 3 years, not including the house down payment. That's a significant portion of your retirement savings." The amount shocked me. Each individual transaction had seemed reasonable at the time, a way to help my son and his wife build their life together. But seeing the total made me realize I had been financially enabling a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford while potentially compromising my own future security. "I need to rethink this arrangement," I said, a new determination settling over me. Harold nodded. "I think that's wise. Let's schedule a follow-up next week when you've had time to consider your options." On my way home, I drove past James and Amanda's house. The luxury SUV in the driveway, the manicured landscaping, the designer furniture visible through the large windows, all of it suddenly looked different to me. How much of their apparent success had been subsidized by my generosity, and how much had that financial dependence contributed to the toxic dynamics between us? When I got home, there was a voice message from James. "Mom, we haven't heard from you in weeks. Tyler misses you. Can you call me back?" No mention of Amanda. No acknowledgement of the ongoing issues between us. Just the implicit expectation that I would eventually come around as I always had before. Instead of calling back immediately, I sat down at my kitchen table with a notepad and began to write. Everything poured out, all the hurt and disappointment, the boundary violations, large and small, the financial concerns, and my expectations for how I deserved to be treated going forward. The letter went through many drafts, as I refined my thoughts, working to be clear and firm without being vindictive. The final version was 4 pages long, written in my neatest handwriting. It laid out specific examples of disrespect I had experienced, acknowledged my own role in allowing the situation to develop, detailed the changes I was making to our financial arrangements, and established clear boundaries for any future relationship. It was the most honest communication I had ever created, free from the fear of rejection that had previously controlled my interactions with James and Amanda. Alongside this process, I continued meeting with Dr. Levine and connecting with a support group she had recommended for parents experiencing similar family conflicts. Hearing others' stories helped me realize I wasn't alone, and the group's collective wisdom about establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries proved invaluable. "The hardest part," said one woman whose situation echoed my own, "is accepting that they might choose to cut you off rather than respect your boundaries. You have to be prepared for that possibility." That was my greatest fear, losing access to James and Tyler completely. But as the weeks passed and I continued my work of self-discovery and empowerment, I came to an important realization: I was already effectively cut off. The relationship as it existed was causing me profound pain and eroding my sense of self-worth. If standing up for myself resulted in temporary or even permanent estrangement, would that be worse than the current situation? By the time I felt ready to take action, 6 weeks had passed since the dinner party incident. James had called several times, each message increasingly perplexed by my continued distance. Amanda had not reached out at all. I had used the time to build a support network, consult professionals, clarify my thoughts, and prepare myself emotionally for all possible outcomes. I was ready to reclaim my dignity and redefine our family relationship on healthier terms. I chose a Monday morning for our meeting, selecting a small cafe in town rather than either of our homes. Neutral territory seemed important for what needed to be said. I arrived early, selecting a quiet corner table and ordering a cup of tea to steady my nerves while I waited. When I called James to arrange the meeting, I had been clear that I wanted to speak with Amanda alone first and that he should expect to hear from both of us afterward. He had seemed confused but agreed, probably assuming this was my way of making peace with his wife. Amanda arrived precisely on time, looking polished in a business suit and heels. She must have come from work or been heading there afterward. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of polite concern as she slid into the seat across from me. "Chantel," she greeted me with a nod. "James said you wanted to talk." "I can only stay for 30 minutes. I have a conference call at 11. "This won't take long," I assured her, my voice calmer than I had expected. The weeks of preparation had given me a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the table. Amanda's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against her coffee cup, her eyes already darting to check the time on her watch. She clearly expected this to be like all our previous interactions, with me accommodating her schedule and priorities while minimizing my own needs. "I've written something I'd like you to read," I said, removing the envelope containing my letter from my purse and sliding it across the table. Amanda frowned slightly but took the envelope. "What is this?" "It's everything I haven't been able to say to you for the past 3 years. She hesitated, then opened the envelope with a small sigh that suggested she was humoring me. As she began to read, her expression shifted from impatience to surprise, then to disbelief, and finally to something approaching anger. The letter began with specific examples of disrespect I had experienced, from the small daily slights to the dinner party humiliation. It acknowledged that relationships are complex, and that I may have made missteps as well, but was clear that nothing justified the pattern of behavior I had endured. The middle section detailed the changes I was making to our financial arrangements, including stopping the monthly transfers, removing James from my credit card, and revising my will to place my assets in a trust with specific conditions. The final section laid out my boundaries for any future relationship: respectful communication at all times, no disparaging remarks about me to others, reasonable access to my grandson, and acknowledgement from both her and James of the hurt they had caused. I ended by expressing hope that we could build a healthier relationship moving forward, but making it clear that I would no longer accept being treated as an inconvenience or an obligation. As Amanda read the last page, her face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. She gripped the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white-looking, as though she might indeed fall off her chair. "Is this some kind of joke?" She finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Amanda. It's not a joke. It's the consequence of how you've chosen to treat me. You can't just cut us off financially. James will be furious." The fact that this was her first concern, rather than the broken relationship or the hurt feelings described in the letter, confirmed I was making the right decision. "I'm not cutting you off completely," I clarified. "I'm establishing appropriate boundaries. You and James are both successful professionals. You don't need my subsidy to maintain your lifestyle." Amanda's phone began ringing, but for once she didn't immediately grab it. Her eyes were fixed on the letter, rereading certain sections as if searching for a loophole. "We've been planning to buy a vacation property in Maine," she said, almost to herself. "The down payment will need to come from your own savings." I finished for her. "I'm sure you can adjust your timeline if necessary." Her eyes narrowed as she looked up at me. "This isn't like you, Chantel. Someone's been filling your head with ideas. Is it that friend of yours, the divorced one who always looks at me like I'm the enemy?" The attempt to deflect and dismiss my agency was so predictable that I almost smiled. "My decisions are my own, Amanda. I've had plenty of time to think while recovering from being publicly humiliated in your home." A flash of something like shame crossed her face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "I was under a lot of pressure that night. You were undermining me in front of my boss. By serving pie." She had no answer for that. "I should go," she said, folding the letter and placing it back in the envelope with trembling hands. "I need to process this." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Amanda," I added as she stood to leave, "my boundaries aren't negotiable. I hope you and James will choose a relationship with me on these new terms, but I'm prepared to stick to my decisions either way." She left without another word, walking quickly to her car with the rigid posture of someone barely maintaining their composure. I remained at the table, finishing my tea with a strange sense of calm. The confrontation I had feared for weeks was over, and I had said everything I needed to say. James called less than 20 minutes later, his voice tight with panic. "Mom, what did you say to Amanda? She's hysterical." I gave her a letter explaining my feelings and the changes I'm making going forward. "I have a copy for you too." "Changes? What changes?" "She's saying something about money and boundaries, and I can't make sense of it." "I think it's better if we meet in person, James. Can you come by my house this evening?" He arrived just after 6, looking harried and confused. I had prepared another copy of the letter for him, along with additional documentation of the financial support I had provided over the years. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where we had shared countless meals and conversations throughout his life. "Before you say anything else," I began, "I want you to read this." James read more slowly than Amanda had, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When he finished, he looked up at me with eyes that reminded me suddenly of the little boy who had broken our neighbor's window with a baseball and come to confess with that same mixture of guilt and apprehension. "Mom, I had no idea you felt this way." "How could you not know? You were there at the dinner party. You've seen how Amanda speaks to me. You've witnessed the gradual exclusion from your lives." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "I guess I just compartmentalized. Told myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed, or that it would get better with time." "And the financial support, did you compartmentalize that too?" A flush crept up his neck. "I knew you were helping us out, but I didn't realize how much it had added up to. Amanda handles most of our finances." We talked for hours, really talked for the first time in years. There were tears on both sides, painful admissions, and moments of genuine connection. James acknowledged that he had failed to stand up for me out of fear of conflict with Amanda. I admitted that my desire to be needed had sometimes led me to overstep boundaries. What happens now? He asked, finally looking drained, but somehow lighter. That depends on both of you. I've made my position clear. I want a relationship with my son and grandson, but not at the expense of my self-respect. James left with promises to talk to Amanda to work on their issues as a couple and to find a way forward that respected my boundaries while preserving our family connection. I wasn't naive enough to believe everything would change overnight, but it was a start. What I hadn't anticipated was the complete silence that followed. 2 weeks passed without a word from either James or Amanda. No calls, no texts, no visits. It was as if they were testing my resolve, waiting to see if I would break first and reach out with apologies and concessions. In the past, I might have done exactly that, unable to bear the separation. But the woman I had become in recent weeks was stronger. I stuck to my decision, focusing on my rediscovered friendships and activities, sharing my journey with my support group, and continuing my sessions with Dr. Levine. The community reaction surprised me. Word had spread about the confrontation, as news always does in small towns. But instead of the judgment I had feared, I received quiet support from unexpected quarters. Greta, my neighbor, who had mentioned Amanda's comments about my supposed memory issues, stopped by with fresh baked bread and an apology. I should have questioned what she was saying, Greta admitted. You've never shown any signs of confusion when we talk. Others reached out in similar ways, small gestures that communicated understanding and solidarity. It seemed Amanda's campaign to undermine me had not been as successful as I had feared. The first crack in the wall of silence came nearly 3 weeks after our confrontation. I was at the grocery store examining peaches in the produce section when I looked up to see Amanda at the end of the aisle. She froze when our eyes met clearly, considering whether to retreat or advance. After a moment's hesitation, she pushed her cart forward, stopping a few feet away from me. She looked different somehow, less polished and confident than usual. Chantel, she acknowledged with a nod. Amanda, I replied evenly. How are you? Managing. She glanced down at her cart, then back at me. James misses you. Tyler keeps asking where Grandma Island. It was a small opening, an implicit admission that my absence was felt. Not quite an apology, but perhaps a first step. I miss them too, I said simply. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before Amanda spoke again. The trust fund arrangement your lawyer sent over. It's fair. More than fair, actually. I had worked with Harold to establish a trust for Tyler's education, with provisions that neither James nor Amanda could access the funds for other purposes. It was my compromise solution, ensuring my grandson's future was secure without directly subsidizing their lifestyle. I'm glad you think so. She seemed about to say more, but instead gave a small nod and continued past me down the aisle. It was a brief exchange, but significant. The power dynamic had shifted, and we both knew it. 3 months after the confrontation at the cafe, James came to my house alone on a Sunday afternoon. He looked nervous, standing on my porch, holding a small potted plant as a peace offering. Can we talk, Mom? He asked when I opened the door. We sat in the garden, the late summer flowers in full bloom around us. James set the plant, a cheerful yellow chrysanthemum, on the table between us. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he began, his voice unsteady. And some counseling too, both on my own and with Amanda. I need to apologize to you properly. Apologize for how I've allowed you to be treated and for not standing up for you when I should have. The words I had longed to hear for so long washed over me like a healing balm, but I remained silent, giving him space to continue. I enabled Amanda's behavior, he admitted. Not just with you, but with others too. It was easier to go along with what she wanted than to face conflict. But that wasn't fair to you, and honestly, it wasn't fair to her either. She needed me to set boundaries too. How is she doing? I asked, genuinely curious about my daughter-in-law's state of mind. James sighed. It's been hard. The financial changes forced us to look at some uncomfortable truths about our lifestyle and expectations. Amanda was raised with a lot of privilege, and she's struggling to adjust her perspective. But she's trying, Mom. We both are. We talked for hours, really talked, without the defensive barriers that had grown between us. James shared how the pressure to maintain their image had created tension in their marriage, how Amanda's insecurity about measuring up to her successful parents had driven many of her status-seeking behaviors, how he had felt caught between his wife's expectations and his love for his mother, unable to find a way to honor both. "None of that excuses how we treated you," he emphasized. "But I want you to know we're working on the underlying issues. That's all I can ask for," I told him, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Before he left, James asked if I would be willing to see Tyler soon. "He asks about you all the time. Would you consider coming over next weekend? Amanda will make sure to give us space." It was a small step, but an important one. When I arrived at their house the following Saturday, Amanda greeted me at the door with formal politeness before making herself scarce. Tyler, now 15 months old, took a moment to remember me but soon was showing me his toys and babbling happily as I sat on the floor with him. James watched us play, a bittersweet smile on his face. "I'm sorry he lost these months with you, Mom. That's on me." The road to rebuilding our relationship was long and not without setbacks. Amanda's initial apology, when it finally came a month later, felt rehearsed and reluctant. "I'm sorry for my behavior at the dinner party," she said stiffly when we met for coffee. "It was inappropriate and disrespectful." It wasn't a comprehensive acknowledgement of the pattern of behavior, but it was a start. I accepted it with grace, knowing that genuine change happens slowly. Meanwhile, I continued to flourish in my rediscovered independence. The support group Dr. Levine had recommended became an important part of my life, and I eventually began helping facilitate sessions for newcomers. There was something powerfully healing about using my own painful experience to help others navigate similar challenges. One of the most unexpected outcomes was the friendship I developed with Sylvia, Amanda's mother. She reached out to me after hearing about our conflict, concerned about her daughter's behavior. Amanda has always struggled with insecurity. Sylvia confided during our first lunch together. Her father and I may have contributed to that with our expectations. "I'm trying to help her see that treating you with respect isn't a threat to her position in James's life." Having an ally in Amanda's mother made a significant difference. Sylvia could influence her daughter in ways I never could, and her support validated my experience. Gradually, over many months, our family dynamic began to shift towards something healthier. Amanda never became the warm, loving daughter-in-law of my dreams, but she developed a baseline of respect that made interactions possible. James grew more confident in establishing boundaries, with both his wife and his mother finding his voice in a way that ultimately strengthened all our relationships. The most profound change, however, was within me. By standing up for myself, I had rediscovered the strong, independent woman who had somehow gotten lost in widowhood and the empty nest phase of life. I built new friendships, took a part-time position mentoring new teachers at my old school, and even started dating again, much to James's initial shock. 1 year after the dinner party incident that had catalyzed so much change, we attempted another family gathering. This time, it was a small affair at my house, just James, Amanda, Tyler, and me. Amanda brought a store-bought dessert rather than trying to compete with my cooking, and I made sure to compliment her recent work accomplishment that James had mentioned to me. The conversation was sometimes awkward, with careful navigation around potentially sensitive topics, but there were also moments of genuine connection. Tyler, now 2 years old and full of energy, provided comic relief with his antics. At one point, Amanda and I found ourselves laughing together at something he did, a small but significant moment of shared joy. As they were preparing to leave, Amanda paused in the hallway, looking at a new photograph I had added to the wall. It showed the 4 of us at Tyler's 2nd birthday party, a celebration I had been fully included in this time. "You know," she said quietly, "I always thought family relationships were a zero-sum game. That for me to be important to James, you had to be less important. I'm starting to see that's not how it works." It wasn't a grand declaration of affection, but in Amanda's understated way, it was an acknowledgement of how far we had come. The path to healing is rarely straight or simple. Our family continues to navigate challenges and occasional tensions. There are still moments when old patterns threaten to re-emerge, when Amanda's insecurity or James's conflict avoidance or my oversensitivity create friction. But now we have tools to address these issues before they escalate, and a shared commitment to maintaining relationships based on mutual respect. The greatest lesson I learned from this painful chapter of my life was that setting boundaries isn't selfish or cruel. It's an act of self-respect that ultimately benefits everyone involved. By allowing myself to be mistreated for fear of losing my son, I had actually enabled unhealthy dynamics that were harming our entire family. Standing up for myself not only restored my dignity, but created the possibility for more authentic connections. As I look back on that terrible dinner party and its aftermath, I feel gratitude alongside the lingering pain. It took a public humiliation to wake me from years of acquiescence, to remind me of the strong woman I had always been before fear clouded my judgment. In the end, Amanda's cruel words, "Get out of my life," led not to my exclusion from the family but to a profound transformation that made room for a healthier version of me within it. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journey of healing and self-discovery. And remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself with love and dignity. Thank you for listening to my story today, and I wish you courage on your own path to healthy relationships.